Okay, today is the day for painting this double window. I have sanded the epoxy wood patch and it came out, I think, okay. Dusting it all off, you can see that the wood is still itself not in great shape. It seems darkened. I did, dig out significant amount of rotted areas. I filled in Boracare. I hope I let it soak in long enough and then dried it out and then put on the liquid epoxy and then the solid epoxy. I did put the liquid epoxy on maybe a little bit too much. If you get the liquid epoxy on the other areas of the wood that you're not filling, then what you find is that when you try to get that off of it, that you do end up sanding a lot and it tends to be gummy. The reason is the two-part liquid epoxy of the Abatron product. It doesn't dry if it's a thin layer, and it will stay gummy. It's only really a primer for the solid wood. You only want to penetrate it in an area where there's a crack. You don't want it on the surface, okay? And when you mix up too much of it, and or you have a surface that's like this, like the checked parts, it's easy for that to get over the surface of the wood that you're not filling. And then that makes it more difficult to sand off or for it to harden, particularly on a colder weather. And it's October now, and the weather's getting colder, and a thin coat won't really dry. This had dried for a couple of days. I let it try to harden up so I could sand it, and pretty much now it's okay that way. But on a thin layer, the thin layers don't harden as fast as the thick layers because the two-part epoxy generates heat, and the thin layer stays cold. And when the temperatures are cold, like the high yesterday was only 60 degrees, and the day before that was similar. Today it's going to be over 70, but after several days, probably like now, it's the third day before I'm actually going to be painting it. You can see here, there's a little divot there. As I was working it in with my fingers, I pushed down in that spot, and that's a little divot, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. I did fill in, as I mentioned, the undercut areas with epoxy in this case. In the past, I have caulked those, but I think the solid fill is going to do a better job protecting. I think the caulk over time is going to probably dry out and work its way out, and the water will get back in. So this is my preference now, is when I have a rotted area, and even an area that I think might just be susceptible to the rot, I do try to undercut it and then fill it in to protect both the vertical and the horizontal piece. Okay. Anyway, this side over here is very similar. You can see I did patch it in now. This section is going to be covered by the vinyl jam liner, so that's not important. I don't even bother sanding that smooth or anything. That's going to be covered over. The idea is to try to get a watertight protection all the way under the vinyl jam liner, so that, because this is the section that tends to rot, it's the corner. Because what happened was the vinyl jam liner goes into there, and underneath that it's not even painted. It might come with a primer, but as it gets older, that's the section which does not have the paint protection. And the vinyl jam liner also, where it meets there, there's actually a certain amount of friction against the wooden sill, and that is typically where it rots. And you see that on all these sides. Those are the prime spots for rotting. So that's where it really needs the attention of being painted or inspected. The paint should be inspected there. And if there is a failure, that's where the water is going to get in. It's hidden because you can't see underneath that with the jam liner comes in place there. Okay, now I'll just there's a spot there where I filled in the checks. You can see that the checks, this wood had been checked, okay? These are the spots where I drilled a hole and I actually poured in the boric here. And then I plugged it up, and now it's sanded down smooth, and I'm hoping that that boric here will penetrate to a deeper depth. Okay? Very similar to the impel rods, but in this case I had the liquid boric here, and I've been experimenting with this just to see if this is a replacement for the impel rods. It's certainly more economical because of the boric here, and I have maybe a quarter of a gallon left of it. So if I can use it that way, I would. Okay, I'm going to hit pause, and then I'll put on the primer. Okay, I put on the first coat of the primer, and it seemed to go on fine. You can still see through the first coat. It's not thick enough to turn everything white. You can still see the areas where it was patched. So today is going to go up to the 70s. So after 4 hours or so in the afternoon, I'll put a second coat on. And then maybe tomorrow I'll put the final coat on. Okay, that's all for this update.